Basiliscus was incompetent. Just straight up didn't have what it took to walk a ball over to a can and drop it in, which was just about all that was left for him to do. The other explanation was that he was a sneaky snake, and he botched the thing on purpose. In this telling, Basiliscus had imperial ambitions of his own, and he was in league with the Eastern general Aspar to undermine Leo by wrecking the Emperor's signature initiative. As Ricimer had discovered, finding a good puppet was not as easy as you might think, and following Marcian's death, Aspar had pushed for Leo over Anthemius because he thought Leo would be easy to control. But Leo had not been so easy to control, and indeed, Aspar suspected that the Emperor was in the middle of a little side project to completely shut Aspar and Aspar's Germanic allies out of power. So, the thinking goes, Aspar had gotten together with Basiliscus, and the two had hatched a plan to intentionally screw up the invasion to humiliate Leo. This had been a massively expensive campaign. If it ended badly, people would start asking why the Emperor had nearly bankrupted the East on some boondoggle in the West. Maybe those questions would get hostile enough that Leo could be overthrown, and Basiliscus installed in his place. This was a clever plan, but as we will see, probably too clever by half, because, Basiliscus is about to come off looking like quite a fool. And really, who wants a fool or an emperor? With the noose quickly tightening around his neck, Genseric scrambled to figure a way out of what appeared to be his certain doom. Romans were coming by land, Romans were coming by sea. In a few days, Carthage would be blockaded, and that would probably be all she wrote for the Vandal Kingdom of North Africa. But Genseric was a survivor, so as Basiliscus approached, Genseric sent out envoys to meet with the Romans and work something out. These envoys came bearing, let's call them gifts, and they begged Basiliscus to give Genseric a few days to work out the logistics of his surrender. Basiliscus accepted these gifts, and decided that giving the Vandals some breathing space at this critical juncture seemed like a fine idea. But Genseric isn't planning to surrender, you dummy. He's preparing to fight it out to the death. He just wants to make sure the final battle is fought on his terms, because he's, smart. Whittling its thumbs and refusing to bring the hammer down on Carthage, Genseric laid his plans carefully. Some of his ships he loaded with every man he could find who could carry a sword. Soldier, civilian, didn't really matter. Here's a spear, you get on this ship. Here's an axe, you get on that ship. But a few of these ships he left empty. These he loaded with flammable material, and yes, I can see where this is going. Then Genseric waited until the winds were right. And on the 5th day after buying off Basiliscus, the winds were right. The Vandal fleet set sail. Maybe Basiliscus thought they were just abandoning the city, or maybe he realized that he had been duped. Who knows? But as the Vandals approached, some of the ships started coming ahead of the rest, and oh my goodness, those ships are on fire. We should probably do something, and oh, it's too late, isn't it? The fire ships smashed into the totally surprised and tightly bunched Roman fleet, and the fires quickly spread. As soon as the fiery chaos had the Romans thoroughly distracted, the rest of the Vandal fleet descended. Though I'm sure Genseric lost a few ships of his own to the fires, it was nothing compared to the Romans, who lost something like 600 ships, just about half their fleet. And who knows how many men went down with those ships. With the invasion in utter, bloody, fiery chaos, Basiliscus, who did not go down with any of his ships, decided to throw in the towel and withdraw. If his plan all along had been to botch the invasion to make Leo look bad, then Basiliscus, A, totally succeeded, but B, was about to discover something he had obviously overlooked. A debacle of this magnitude might reflect badly on an emperor, but it's also going to reflect really badly on the guy who actually led the debacle. Disgraced, Basiliscus basically had to go into hiding upon his return to Constantinople. Which is why the whole make Leo look bad explanation, while juicy, is not really a complete meal. Basiliscus had to have known that it would be bad for him too, right? I mean, obviously it wasn't supposed to go down as horribly as it did. But still, what could he have been thinking? Either way, Basiliscus is a dingbat. Seriously, go look this guy up. He is a jackass. The failed attempt to retake North Africa nearly bankrupted the treasuries of both East and West and produced no tangible benefits. It would be 65 years before Constantinople made another stab at retaking North Africa. After the failures of 468, however, Anthemius refused to simply give up the ghost and accept that being Emperor of the West basically meant being the kind of ruler of the Italian peninsula. So, like Majorian, Anthemius attempted to keep pressing back against the tide of history, and in 469 he instigated a campaign to retake Gaul. During the uncertain years of the interregnum, when Ricimer ruled alone, the Goths up in Aquitaine became filled with a new expansionist spirit. In 466, Theodoric II had been killed by his far more ambitious younger brother Euric, and under Euric's leadership, the Goths began to spread deeper into both Spain and Gaul, slowly annexing more and more territory. With his treasury drained, Anthemius was unable to halt this spread himself, but he did induce Reothamus, the king of the Bretons, to fight on Rome's behalf. Possibly coming down from the island of Britain, but more likely coming in from the Brittany Peninsula, Reothamus did indeed march on Rome's behalf, but he was beaten and driven back by the newly empowered Goths. This brief little war is hardly worth mentioning in itself, but it is interesting in that Reothamus is one of the possible candidates for the title of historical King Arthur. The next year saw no time for any kind of positive steps forward for the West, because the brief honeymoon period between Ricimer and Anthemius was about to come to an abrupt end, as we all knew that it would. At some point in 470, a plot to assassinate Anthemius was uncovered in the upper reaches of the imperial court. This plot centered around the Master of Offices, a man named Romanus, and after the plot was discovered, Anthemius understandably responded by executing Romanus for his treachery. The only hitch was that Romanus was a Ricimer man through and through, and the virtual king of Italy did not appreciate it when one of his close associates was killed by some foreign aristocrat who thought himself emperor. Immediately after the execution, Ricimer gathered up 6,000 men and marched them into Milan, shutting the gates behind them. Anthemius was down in Rome when Ricimer decided to occupy Milan, and it was very clear to everyone that some kind of civil war was about to break out. But just as things were about to get out of hand, both sides decided to pull back. The Bishop of Pavia, a man named Epiphanius, acted as a go-between, and the two rival leaders agreed to a one-year truce. Epiphanius, incidentally, was just getting started on a long and distinguished diplomatic career, and was eventually made Saint Epiphanius. And incidentally, a biography written in the early 500s detailing the bishop's adventures through the crazy post-Roman Western world forms a key primary source for a lot of what we're talking about here today. Anyway, with a civil war averted, Anthemius took his one-year truce with Ricimer and used it to once again attempt to reassert some control in Gaul and push back the encroaching Goths. Crossed the Alps in 471, but history had turned decisively against the imperial authorities in Italy. The Romans were beaten back, and the Goths wound up stronger than ever, controlling virtually all of southern Gaul and severing the last link between Rome and the domain of the Soissons, the last remnant of Roman authority left in the north. With Anthemius failing to make headway in Gaul, his popularity in Italy faltered badly. His standing with the Italians had never been that great since they all saw him as some foreigner butting his head into their affairs, but they were willing to go along with him since he had the backing of the East, and who knows, maybe he can pull a rabbit out of his hat. But when he failed to pull out the rabbit, they turned on him. When the one-year truce with Ricimer expired, the virtual king was crouched and ready to pounce. Anthemius' position was so weak that he didn't even bother trying to meet strength with strength. Instead, he feigned an illness and asked for asylum within St. Peter's. This move bought him time to send word to Leo that the natives had gotten restless and that maybe some muscle from the east was in order. But Leo was still reeling from the disastrous misadventure in North Africa, and plus, he really didn't have any muscle to send. So instead, he sent one man, who had some standing in the west, to broker another truce, Olybrius. Now, sending Olybrius was perhaps a curious choice. Sure, the nobility of the west was bound to at least hear him out. He was, after all, one of them. But at the same time, this is a guy who has a reasonably valid claim to the throne himself. Certainly Genseric would back him at the first chance he got. So how did Leo not think that Olybrius wouldn't just show up, cut a deal with Ricimer, oust Anthemius, and then make common cause with the Vandals? Well, for starters, Olybrius had to leave his wife and daughter behind in Constantinople, which is enough to keep most men honest. But beyond that, there is one other small point of importance. Leo did not really want Olybrius to broker a truce between Ricimer and Anthemius. What Leo really wanted was for Anthemius' rule to be made perfectly secure. Ricimer threatened that security. Olybrius, with his own claims to power, also threatened that security. So right before the diplomatic mission sailed, Leo went to one of the sub-secretaries and entrusted him with the real plan. This sub-secretary was given a note for Anthemius' eyes only. I want you to kill Ricimer and Olybrius as soon as you get this. Next week, though, we will see how maybe Leo should not have put this in writing. Ricimer had men stationed all over Italy, and when the diplomatic mission from Constantinople arrived at the port of Ostia, Ricimer had men there too. Men with orders to search everyone and everything aboard to determine whether this thing was on the level. When Ricimer discovered Leo's note, that's going to be the end of Anthemius, even though technically he had nothing to do with anything. Hello, and welcome to the History of Rome.